Oh, all right. So we're back with another podcast here. This book, I'm actually, what was funny? This book, I'm actually more excited to talk about than almost any other book. I would say not every other book, but almost any other book because
Okay.
this book was recommended by a Team 651 player. I would have to check my PMs to remember exactly who it was, but yeah, this book was recommended by a Team 651 player, and it's excellent, 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 excellent book. Um,
Okay.
My only, downside with the book, it was just too long. It was so long, but it
Right.
actually had me. It had me. I was intrigued by the entirety of this book. It was about 16 hours long, so it was quite the read, but it was just so intriguing all the way through. Like it just captured my attention all the way through. I gave it a 9 out of 10, which is a very, very high score for me.
Ooh.
The book's called The Body Keeps the Score. The
Mm-hmm.
body keeps the score. So it's called The Body Keeps the Score, but it's also like the body and mind keeps the score. Or it could be
Okay.
called or it could be called The Body and Mind Never Forgets. That's
Okay.
another title for this book. It could be called. Um, so if you're into like psychology and the brain stuff and like how we process trauma and stuff, this book podcast is going to be for you. And
Right. I'm intrigued.
this is the last book podcast we're going to do. Before we go to our
Yeah.
other format, the poker mindset stuff,
Of
the
course.
poker
We
coaching.
told
So
them we did warn them at the end of the last podcast, which was like about a month ago. Like,
yes,
you know, definitely. I mean, we were in Yosemite at that time. Now we're in like Super Mario World
this is
together.
Iceland. I thought we're in Iceland. No,
Well, yeah, it could be. Oh no, we're in we're in a Minecraft village actually. That's what we're in.
this is the metaverse. We're in the metaverse. That's
We are in
exactly.
the metaverse. Yeah,
This is the
we always
metaverse.
were anyway.
Yeah.
But yes, definitely different day. Um, different shirts that we've got on as well, despite how they may appear. I don't know why we always try and make it look like we're doing it on different days, man. We should just be honest with these dudes. We just record two at once.
This is not a different day. This is the
This is not a
continuation.
drill.
Yes. All right. So Sky, let's get straight into it.
All right. So the body keeps the score 9 out of 10. So obviously, Jack is very harsh with his 9 out of 10s, as we've discussed at length throughout the duration of these podcasts. And a nice one to go out with. So the first point, trauma is stored in the brain. Even when you think you have gotten over it or brushed it aside, you can't just store it in the back of your brain. It must be fully processed for healing to occur. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So this is the whole thing about, this is why so many people end up seeing therapists, isn't it? Because they've got unresolved trauma in their head. And I know that there are terms to this like feedback loops and stuff like that,
Yeah.
where sort of negative thoughts just continue in a circular motion in your mind. Sometimes beneath the surface, you might not even be consciously aware that your brain is trying to process this trauma. And certainly it takes its effect on your mental health. And this is, I speak from personal experience. I've always struggled a little bit with rumination.
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily intrusive thoughts, I wouldn't say, but certainly like, aggravating thoughts where I'm trying not to think about something that makes me unhappy, like a bad memory or something like that. And my mind kind of just takes over and replays it, almost like, have you ever seen Clockwork Orange? The
I
film?
haven't.
The movie. There's a scene like they try and brainwash this guy, and what they do is they tie him to a chair, like they pin him to a chair, they put a straitjacket on him, and they clamp his eyes open, and he has to watch this like certain footage of like things like world wars and just like horrible things happening, right?
Right.
That's kind of how it feels sometimes with rumination. Is that your brain is basically forcing you to watch something that you don't want to see, and unless you directly address it, your brain will always find a time to bring that up and replay it to you. And I guess that's what this point is about. Unless you actually directly deal with the problem, resolve it, you're never going to forget it.
Yeah. If you're trying not to think about a certain trauma or something, what's going to happen is
You can think about it loads.
you're going to think about it, because whatever you resist will persist. That's like an old saying. Whatever you resist will persist. So if you're trying not to think about a certain trauma that you had, then you're inevitably gonna think about it. And in this book, the crazy thing is, it's not like, it's a lot of the book is about very serious trauma, like serious trauma. When I say serious trauma, I'm talking about people that have, like military, veterans and stuff that like have seen their best friends dying in front of their eyes and like came back and like have flashbacks of like the bombings and like the crazy war, stories, and even like trauma where like people have lost their arms and legs, like very serious stuff. Or like also like, on a serious level where like, children that have been like molested like by family members like over and over again. We're not talking about like a one-time rape victim. We're talking about like a reoccurring thing that's happened for like years, and like, so they're talking about very serious trauma in this book. But they also talk about that this can relate to very minor traumas as well. When I say minor, I mean like not really minor, because like trauma can be anything. When we're like 5 years old, a trauma can be where your dad left you alone in the house for 30 seconds. That's a trauma. You lost your mother in a grocery store for 10 seconds and you were freaking out for a little bit. That's a trauma as well. So we have like all have so many traumas in our life, and a lot of them which we're not even aware of, which is crazy. We have our serious traumas, but then we have a whole variety of other traumas as well that people don't even realize that they have, because they look back at it like, oh, it's not a big deal. Yeah, I lost my mom in the grocery store for 30 seconds. Like, that's not a big deal. Looking back at it now, it's not a big deal. But in that moment when you were a child, it was a very big deal. And that's when the trauma occurred. So it only matters how you felt about it, back then. So really what you have to do to let go of these traumas is allow yourself that time to go back in time. So let's say you lay down in bed and you're like, you know what, I'm going to go back in time from when I was 4 years old for when this thing occurred. Or let's say like these war veterans, they have to really get to a point where they accept that this is what happened. But it's way easier said than done kind of stuff. You have to relive the trauma, let those emotions come up, not resist them, not be like, oh my God, no, stuff them down. Like, let's forget that ever happened, because that doesn't work. The whole point of this book is your body and your mind remembers. No matter how much you try to forget, if you try to forget something, your body and your mind still remembers. So you need to fully process that trauma. You need to get to a point where you let all the emotions come up. You like, if it's a serious trauma, there's gonna be a lot of crying. There's gonna be a lot of negative emotions that just fly up. You just let it all come up, and you relive that experience. You literally relive it as if it's happening, over again. And you relive it. You let those sensations like happen in your body. It could be a traumatic event, another traumatic event. When that happens, when you relive all those negative things, but it's what's necessary to process the healing, to accept that this is what happened, and that's the only way you can really, move past it, is to come to acceptance with it, not like, oh no, this didn't happen, resist it, let me store this in this part of my brain and never think about it again. That doesn't work. You need to accept, this is what happened. You need to embrace and accept. This is exactly what happened. I'm not afraid of feeling it again. I can go towards it. I'm going to go move towards it and let my body process this, let it feel this, and let it happen. Not like let it feel it and then no, wait, I'm not feeling good again. Let me stuff it back down. You need to actually let it come up and accept and embrace it, which is, again, easier said than done.
By the way, I'm echoing. Am I echoing at your end?
No, not at all.
Okay. Hopefully it won't come out in the video. That all makes perfect sense. I had a similar experience. Like, I had a couple of memories from being a kid that sort of shaped the way that I was as an adult, quite an anxious, like nervous adult, and I talked them through with Elliot Rowe.
Okay.
When I was having mental game coaching from Elliot Rowe a few years ago, but I was mostly talking about like poker related things, you know, like my inability to really deal with variance and blah 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 stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But he asked me, like, you know, he asked me a whole bunch of questions about my past. Obviously, this is their area of expertise. He asked me a few questions about my past, and then this situation came up, and he was like, right, there's no point in us dealing with anything else. This is what we should have been dealing with all along. Mm-hmm. He said, these incidents, like this type of shit that happened when you were a kid,
right?
That is what you really want to deal with. And he made me do this like exercise, for example, where I imagined that I was a little kid. So he's like, remember yourself as a little kid at that time, and imagine that little kid is knocking at your door right now, and you answer the door, and you need to explain to that kid there that everything's okay, mm-hmm. that, you know, it's all okay, that everything worked out fine, everything's going to be all right, and it's not that big a deal.
Right.
That was the process that he used to like address a few traumatic things in my life.
You gotta go back and relive.
Yeah, admittedly, so I had to describe what the events were, and then we did this process of like addressing it and trying to tell myself at the time that everything was fine now and that it all worked out okay. And admittedly, I never really reflect that much on it, but I don't think about those incidents nearly as much now as I used to. And when I do, it's like the sting's been taken out of it.
Yeah, the sensation lessens. That's what happens.
Yeah.
That, like, you know that sensation you feel when you're thinking about something horrific? Like, after you go back and you heal it, you'll feel a little bit less of that. It'll still be there, but it's less. And then if it's still there, you can go back and literally relive it again, and then now it'll be even less. So the sensation just gets less and less. The more you accept and the more you relive that experience and you heal, the less that sensation. Like when you get triggered, let's call it, you know, when something happens, somebody says something, and that triggers that certain something.
Takes you back, yeah.
That takes you back there. Now the sensation's a little bit less than what it used to be before, when you were trying to always resist it or whatever. So that sensation like dies down a little bit, let's call it.
So just to cap this point off, I want to say this to the people. So like some of these incidents when I was a kid, like Jack said, some of them were serious, some of them were not so serious, but
they're all serious though
at the time.
Yeah.
And you know, they would pop into my head and I would think about them throughout my life, but I never resolved them. I would replay them but not resolve them. And there's a huge difference between those two things. So I would say anyone watching this who feels the same way and they have these sorts of old memories come up that make them feel sad, but it's not resolving the issue, I would strongly suggest you talk to a therapist, because they have the training and the techniques to help you through that situation and help you reach a resolution with that thought. Some of them are obviously very personal and it's not a particularly comfortable conversation to have, and I'll admit that some of my conversations with Elliot were not conversations I'd like to have with anyone else in the world. Mm-hmm. But that was his job. It was what he was designed to do. And he did an excellent job of helping me through that situation and reframe the way I thought about it. And I'm so glad that I did. So for anyone watching who's reluctant about maybe seeking help for some of these traumatic thoughts, or maybe, very possibly, in fact, you think that because they weren't that traumatic in the context of, say, the world, you think that maybe you're being overly sensitive, or that they don't require, seeking help for. Again, going back to it's all relative. If it's in your mind, if it's nagging, if it comes up, somewhat often and it bothers you, try and resolve it. Because it's really hard to be a relaxed and happy person when you have this trauma floating around in you. I guess that's the essence of this book, to be fair, Jack. You said the body, the mind always remembers.
Yeah, and just before we get to the next point, going off, what you just said there, like before you would think about it all the time, but in a different way. So the mindset is different. So
yes,
before you would think about it in a way where it was not wanted. You like every time it would come, you like try to like maybe forget about it or escape it.
It was intrusive, yeah.
It was intrusive, and then the time with Elliot, you were purposefully bringing it up. It's a different mindset. It's like, okay, I'm accepting that this happened, and now I'm literally going towards it. I'm purposefully doing this, as compared to before when it was kind of like hijacking me. So it's like a way different things. So thinking about it in the way where it's like hijacking you, or in an intrusive way, and you're trying to resist it, and you're like, it's coming up, and you're like, oh no, get out of here. That's a whole different thing as compared to, when you're like sitting down, you're like, you know what? Now I'm gonna think about it on my terms. I'm gonna accept it into my body, into my mind, into my soul. I'm gonna feel those sensations. I'm gonna let this happen. You know, so it's two different things, and that's the difference.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's get to that second point.